Just about 2 weeks ago, I was telling you about Uno Nomad, the half or three-fifths of the way house located in one of Washington, D.C.'s less stinking rich suburbs. I told you about Greta there in the kitchen. I told you about the shock with which Sherry faced yet another impending move. What I failed to mention, however, was that Shawn got into it with some of the other boys living there at the home and had a minor temper tantrum just outside the front door. He'd been playing with some of the other kids out there when one of them had asked Shawn how he and his mother had ended up in that situation. Why didn't they have a house? Why wasn't his mother working a regular job? This is where the temper tantrum came in. Because boys Shawn's age, all the way up to boys Mitch McConnell's age, have some difficulty talking about the world, or even seeing the world, as it is. They reside in a world of extremes, where people are either right or wrong. Things are either your fault or someone else's. The only gray in Shawn's world had 50 Shades, and he wasn't allowed to so much as touch that book. He could only sneak a peek at it whenever Sherry wasn't around. These days, that wasn't much. When faced with a question like, "Why don't you have a house?" Shawn's mind could only grasp the concept in the language of extremes. And that didn't leave room for why his parents were dead. Because gun laws are all about grays. Background checks assume anyone could be a risk. While on the flip side, stand your ground laws inject a gray taint into every situation. Because anyone can be a threat. The only blacks and whites usually referred to those shot and those pulling the trigger. So let's try, why wasn't Sherry working a regular job? Shawn knew his aunt had lost the bar his father had built with his own investment portfolio, which in the end was not a bad choice. It wasn't like Shawn's dad, Blake, would have spent the money in his retirement. Shawn didn't think his aunts had ruined the bar on purpose, but he had a suspicion that she never ran the place as well as his dad. But these are not the kinds of words young men repeat to each other. And in the time it took the boys to leave the house and walk outside, Shawn wasn't able to think of a better answer. Instead, Shawn stammered, I don't think, I don't think. And though Shawn wasn't quick to think, that didn't mean another boy wasn't ready with his own bid for alpha male. He said, "It's 'cause she took a man's business. She took it from him. She ruined it. Just like that woman in Brooklyn, the one with the initials like Assassin's Creed, or that woman running for president, Warren something. They think they're supposed to steal everything from men, but we're sick of it." "Sherry didn't steal," Shawn began to say before his voice was drowned out by the other boys, all with their own miniature conspiracy theory. And though Shawn shouted to be heard, it wasn't long before he couldn't hear his own voice. His mind was set to that dark night when Sherry sat Shawn down in what was then his living room and told him what they had just learned about the shooting in Las Vegas. and his shouting became clouded with tears, punctuated with fists. And before Shawn knew what he was doing, he was running through the streets of Deanwood. Another dark night in Washington. Shawn wasn't so young that he didn't know where he was or where he could go. And it was with that goal that he had a name in mind. He never thought he'd actually seek this person out, but in the dark of night, where else would he go? Where else could he go? He didn't have a buck to his name. But as he walked over the Anacostia River, its wide mouth opening for him beneath Benning Road, as the train roared by behind him, Shawn understood for possibly the first time that he had no other options. Shawn had spent months living in a dream world in which his mom and dad would return home, their deaths both terrible examples of oversight. And they could return home. And maybe they'd get a dog. Shawn dropped his dream into the river, ashamed at how long he had held it close to his heart, not telling anyone, just clutching it, as if the power of his embrace would bring his dream to life. The night air was cool over the Anacostia River, and Shawn gave himself a minute to take it in, while berating himself for acting like a child. He would never behave in such a way again, screaming and crying as other boys laughed at him. They told him that this isn't a country for women any longer, that men were sick of what women were doing to this world, and it was time for men to take control once again. Men passed laws to limit women's rights. Men incited violence to intimidate women and keep them in their homes. Men would do anything they needed to do. The boys outside of Uno Nomad shouted at Shawn as they pushed him off balance and laughed when he fell. Trump had given the nation back to the men who had built it, defended it, and saved it. And no little pussy boy with 2 dead parents and an aunt who couldn't hold down a job was going to change that. Those words echoed inside of Shawn's mind, in the high-pitched derision of any of the boys, as he walked and walked, often losing his way, distracted and annoyed, helpless and fearful. Fortunately, it wasn't too long before Shawn saw a sign he had been looking for, which read, Mannys Muffins. There, in the suburb of Langton, the sign was bigger than Shawn had expected, as was the muffin shop itself, as was the crowd within. He sat down beside the old gent sitting on a bench against the window just outside of the muffin shop, as the old gent told him, Mannys has become an institution in itself, which is helpful when so many of the institutions we've relied on have been gutted and bled dry. Shawn didn't really understand what old Herbert was talking about, but he was happy to see a familiar face. Women ruin everything. Just like Sherry. She knew you were part of the family. And that's straight from Dad. It was on his board. Shawn was right, of course. Blake's list of great perfection held 63 rules of life by the time it was finally taken down from the wall inside Freedom Fried. One of those rules, Rule 6, said without qualification, old Herbert his family. But old Herbert shook his head. He said, "You can't expect everything to work out, pup. Otherwise, you drive yourself crazy." "Like you?" Shawn asked. "Like me," old Herbert told him. Shawn replied, "But things will never get better as long as Sherry doesn't have a shot. And as long as men are in charge like Trump has put them in charge, that's how it'll be." Old Herbert laughed a little and said, "Like Trump has put them in charge, huh?" Shawn shook his head and told old Herbert all about how things have been getting worse by the day and nothing would get better as long as Trump was in office. And that would be for a very long time. "You think he's gonna win next year?" old Herbert asked him. And Shawn was ready with an answer. He was ready with several answers. The boys outside of Uno Nomad had repeated with great glee all the reasons why Trump would remain in office. He said, "Everything's better. The GDP is up, whatever that is, and unemployment is down, and the economy is good. Even the bond market is up, and I think that's supposed to be good too." Shawn told old Herbert that as long as those things he didn't quite understand remained up, Trump would remain in office. Old Herbert shook his head and said, "Maybe so, pup. Maybe so. I've heard all those reasons, Heard them for years. They're the rich people reasons. Trump works for the rich, and the rich say, 'We'll let you stay just as long as those numbers keep going in the right directions.' Trump had nothing to do with them, but he'll keep taking credit just as long as he can." "So there really is no hope for Sherry then?" Shawn asked. Old Herbert put a hand on Shawn's head, and Shawn could tell it wasn't a very clean hand, and told him, "Hope is a lie, pup. It's a magic trick. People in charge know that if they can take your hope away from you, they can take your power. But there's more to a nation than just numbers, There's people. People being put in cages at our southern border. People without drinkable water in our nation's cities. People who want a future for their kids. A future Trump wants no part of, which is why he works against it. You see, people can be tricked with numbers. But you can't fake decency. You can't fake competency. You can't fake being president. Not for long. Not for more than just about 4 years. "So there is hope?" Shawn asked. And old Herbert did a very smart thing. He kept his hand on Shawn's head, gave it a pat, and did not say a word. Not for several long, silent minutes. "You want a muffin?" he finally asked. Hope cannot easily be restored, but a muffin never hurts. Until next time, be good to yourself, be kind to others, and let's make this world a better place.
This is Ken LaSalle, and I just wanted to thank you for stopping by for this episode of DC Home. For more information about myself and the work I do, I invite you to take a look at my website at kenlasalle.com. You can also find my work on Amazon, Audible, iTunes, and anywhere you find books and audiobooks available online. And look for the first DC Home compilation coming soon. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube by searching my name, Ken LaSalle. And thank you, as always, for your support.